I want you to sing me 2 whole steps and a half step. Then I want you to sing me 3 whole steps and another half step. They would mess it up. They probably wouldn't get off the first note. But if I said, now, here's do, and let's sing do, re, mi, fa, so, when they got to mi and sang fa, they sang a half step. How did they know to do that? I don't know how they know to do that. But they know when they sing do, re, mi, fa, when we get to mi, the next note is a half step. Same way with, here we go, I want you to start on do and go clear to T, and when we get to T, I couldn't beg them to sing a whole step. They just wouldn't do it. When you get to T, you sing a half step. Now, nobody, except for choir people, these people over here have never said to themselves, T to do is a half step. All right? They haven't said those words. But that doesn't mean they don't have that knowledge. Right? And maybe music theory is a lot like that. Sometime I'm going to say something about the subdominant that leads to the dominant that leads to the tonic. And many of you are going to say, those words have never formed in my brain. Except that we all understand that, even if we didn't understand the word subdominant and dominant and tonic, we all understand that 4 leads to 5 leads to 1, or we might not even know the numbers, but we still understand somewhere that this sounds right. And when somebody doesn't do that, this sounds wrong. Okay? So, in other words, you have information that you just may not have words to, and yesterday we put some words to it. They were called do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now, choir gentlemen, may I ask you, do you know, right offhand, whether you're using a fixed do system or a movable do?
It's a movable do.
You're exactly right. It's a movable do. And a fixed do system means that C is always do. And this is another piece of information I mentioned yesterday. Many of the European countries, instead of calling this a C, call it do. They don't have the word C in their musical vocabulary. They don't have the word D in their vocabulary. If I would write that on a D on the board for somebody from one of the European countries and say, what is it, they would immediately say, re. Now, what that means is, and of course it has to be a fixed do in order to have that system. And I told them a story that was way too long and boring for them. Most of them fell asleep in the middle of it. But the cellist I had from Germany, we had a lot of trouble understanding each other's language, you know, because he came in and he was an excellent cellist, but not as much English as most, what do you call that? Foreign exchange students have. So we struggled a little bit with that, but the worst struggle was, I would say, cello start on your D, and it, what? But, and it took me a long time to understand that he, you know, I needed to say re. Cello start on the re, and he understood it immediately. Or, you know, start on G, that didn't mean anything to him, but start on sol, and that meant something to him. So, now, we're just going to complicate things even more.
Yay!
Because it's always nice to complicate things. But on page 90, we're going to add yet a, what is this, the 3rd or 4th set of identifications for notes. As you see that major scale there, we call that tonic to be the first note. And tonic is the one that you can almost always find in your head. When you hear any song on the radio, at any given time, and you may not believe that you can do this yet, but at any given time, while you're listening to whatever you're listening to on the radio, I could open your car door and say, sing me the tonic of this tune, and you could probably do it. Okay? even if the singer doesn't ever sing tonic, you are actually listening to everything. You don't just listen to the singer. You listen to the bass player and whatever else, you know. And yeah, the bass player likes that, yeah. But so no matter what, you know, what we're doing, I think I can get you to sing me the tonic of just about any song that you listen to regularly. And so tonic actually comes from the word home tone. Home tone, okay? The second one is called the supertonic. Super just meaning one step bigger than tonic, okay? Mediant is the one people mess up so much because also it has a cousin that is called the submediant, and so we oftentimes get mediant and submediant mixed up, but mediant is the third note of the scale, okay? The subdominant is the fourth note of the scale. The dominant, and sub obviously means below, like submarines are below the surface. Subdominant is below dominant. And then there's dominant, and then the sixth degree of the scale is called the submediant. The seventh one is leading tone, and finally tonic again. Be aware that leading tone actually changes when we go to our first minor scale. Leading tone absolutely has to be a half step away from tonic. And what were you going to say?
I said that it goes down a half step.
That's right. It goes down a half step. In other words, don't get the idea that 7 always means leading tone. In the major scale, 7 is the leading tone. In the melodic minor scale, 7 is the leading tone, and I'm jumping past where we are right now. In the harmonic minor scale, 7 is a leading tone. But in the natural minor scale, 7 is actually a whole step away from 8, and so we call that subtonic. Subtonic. Only happens once. Well, I should say once. Natural minor, also Aeolian, which, by the way, they are the same thing. All right.
What about melodic minor on the way down?
On the way down, melodic minor 7 is a full whole step away from the top, which makes it then a subtonic instead of a leading tone.
Where does the melodic minor scale come from, and why do we even have it?
Why?
That's a great question. I'm going to go ahead and answer that question. It's also a question that I would probably try to answer when we get to changing minor scales, but it's a good enough question. I think it deserves an answer right now. When we first when we first decided on the Aeolian mode being our minor scale, the first thing we encountered was that subtonic that we didn't like. Maybe just a little bit too morbid or too sad. I don't know. You can use any thing you want, but there was just something that, well, we were still reveling in the joy of the major scale, having that nice leading tone. And during the time that we were experimenting with this, the choirs and the orchestras and the bands and everything that was performing were performing works written, and do you remember the name I called it the other day when I was telling you about it? Homophonic music? More like chorales. Yeah. They were doing chorale things, instrumentally and vocally. And they discovered that it really didn't hurt anything to impose a leading tone, change the harmony ever so slightly right there so it sounded better and felt better. It didn't really detract from the minor sound. We resolved to that minor. So we just started raising the 7th. We called that harmonic minor scale because it was really for the harmony. The harmony was the most important thing of homophonic music at that time. And you didn't hear anything that was particularly bad about voice leading in that, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying, no, because I could have messed that up really bad, you were just being polite, weren't you? But anyway, there wasn't anything wrong with that. The problem came along about 50 to 75 years later. Fellows by the name of Bach, Vivaldi, Corelli, all those German and Italians began changing the style of music to what was called polyphonic music. Polyphonic music was not like a big chorale. It was, etc. Each individual part in the orchestra or the band had its own melody, okay? Or the altos weren't just filling in the thirds or the fifths of the chords, they actually had a melody to sing. Fugues came along at this time. You know what a fugue is, where everybody is like competing one against another, you know, who's got the best melody, etc. But and harmony was still very important. Obviously, you couldn't have this melody going along here and another melody whose notes did not sound good with this melody. So harmony was still important, but the melody became the more important thing. And this is where we ran into the problem with the harmonic minor scale. Kind of sounds Arabian, doesn't it? It was really hard to write a melody around that. Unless, of course, you were writing for the Arabian king, or something like that, or writing for Aladdin. But other than that, it was really hard to figure out how to resolve that problem of, and what the problem is when you just come in and raise the seventh, it leaves a space behind it of more than a whole step. That's actually a step and a half. Okay? So what they said was, well, in order to fix that, if we just raise the sixth and the seventh, we wouldn't have that problem. So instead of going, and by the way, you've practiced this, I'll bet Chris has practiced these scales a million times, the harmonic minor, and then melodic minor, the raised sixth takes care of that whole problem. Let me do that again. But then as a reward for being allowed to completely monkey up the minor scale, the scale god said, but coming down you have to lower the seventh and the sixth. And what that really meant was, when the first uses of the melodic minor started to happen, the composers themselves, it sounds like they governed themselves and they made rules, and they didn't really do that. They all probably agreed, even in absentia, that we should use the raised sixth and seventh when we're near a cadence or a resolution. If we are not near the resolution, we should use the normal sixth and seventh from the natural minor scale. And that was a beautiful idea in theory, I guess. And Bach, I think, maybe took to that for about 2 days. And then he said to himself, I have 2 extra notes I can write in this scale. I have a scale that has not only a G and an A, but a G sharp and an A sharp, and I'm going to use all 4 of those notes as fast as I can. Partly because he was anal retentive and type A personality, but anyway, it is supposed to be as if we only used the leading tone when we were about to make a cadence. And as I say, from time to time, it doesn't really sound like the composer thought that much about it. All right? All right. Great question. Did that answer your question?
Mostly.
Mostly?
I still think it's just too much of a pain to, I don't know, I think when you're writing something, are you really paying that much attention to, I'm going up now, so I'm using the, natural minor versus melodic, or versus the other minor,
That's a good question. What's my answer to that?
It seems like you pay more attention to the melody that you want